have, whether you're listening live or on a recording later, we are happy to have you here. Today, I have Chris with me. He is actually part of all three of ADPI's educational programs that we offer: MMA, MSTRA, and MRIA. So he is pretty awesome. And he's here to share some of his recent success stories that he's had. So, Chris, welcome. Thank you for
Yeah,
being
thanks.
here today.
Thanks, Hannah. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So without further ado, let's just dive right in and get started with the first question. So, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to real estate investing?
Yeah. So I've been in the Army for a long time, 25 plus years, I guess, at this point. And like most military members, I was an accidental landlord, right? So I did that for probably 22 of those 25-ish years for a long time. I never really looked at what we do as we bounce from place to place as an opportunity as much as just a way to take care of my family. So a couple of years ago, about 3 years ago, I ran into somebody who um, who was really focused on infinite banking, and that drove me down sort of one avenue of kind of being uh, my own investor, and that made me to relook at things far differently. So I played around, like I said, accidental landlord. I played around with some of that real estate, and I had bought and sold. And I had some rentals, but none of it was really great, and all was accidental. But the idea of starting to think differently, and infinite banking was sort of my door into that different thinking. Then drove me to realize there's so much I didn't know. And from that perspective, I started seeking out information, where I came upon the ADPI podcast with Kevin Brenner, and then that drove me to go into Maria. Then a couple other things drove me into MMA and the STRA courses.
Awesome. So, before we get into your story, I wanted to ask you, how did you learn? Whoops, show. How did you learn about our platform and what motivated you to join ultimately?
So kind of like I was talking about, so I started with the podcast, and I had this sort of insatiable appetite for education, which I've always had. I've always very much after failing out of school early on in my career. Once I kind of figured it out, I've really been a huge fan of education, any education. And so I after listening to the podcast for probably 6 months or so, I
Mhm.
decided I had some money saved up, and I decided let's get the education. And I think there was sort of to use sort of an ocean reference. I had to get through the surf to get to the water. But that idea, that surf, what was holding me back was, is it worth it? Is it going to be valuable? Am I really going to learn stuff? And ultimately, what I found out was it short circuits. It creates a quick pathway to understanding the environment, and then that kind of drove me to get more.
Yeah, a little bit less trial and error when you're educated, right?
Yeah.
Learning from other people's mistakes is
Yeah, I think not only learning from other people's mistakes, but this idea that you have enough language so that you can speak intelligently and ask the right questions. I think one of
mm,
my biggest problems, I didn't know what questions to ask, and I think that's when you muddle through things as you try new stuff. You're like, well, I'm not smart enough to know the questions to ask. Then you get this experience, so you short circuit that experience, right? And you're
abs-
asking better questions.
absolutely. Okay, so can you tell us a little bit about your current success deal that you are working on, and if you could, from the very beginning to kind of where you're at with it now? So just a little story on that would be great.
Yeah, sure. So I'm involved in multiple investments at this point.
Mhm.
But my current main project is a short-term rental up in the White Mountains in New Hampshire, and this was a complete. It's kind of like a burr in an STR. So it was a rundown chalet, sits on a river in rural New Hampshire, and I from a distance, which has been problematic. Uh, had to gut the place, hire some contractors, get them in there, and turn it into an STR. And so, where did it start? I mean, the nice thing is that once the renovation's done, the estimates it'll be worth a significant more than the money I'm putting in for the renovation. And so I'm looking to burr that thing. So I'm putting a whole bunch of money into it, personal money that I was able to hold from this infinite banking thing that Derek does. And then once I flip this property into an STR, which I'm hoping that'll be ready to go in December, so I can get this year's tax benefits. And then I'll refinance it into a more conventional product, and then pay myself back. And then at this point, I should generate some additional. It should be a infinite investment in the sense that I'll have no money in the deal when it's all said and done.
Wow. That's awesome. So what is your target audience then? Like you said, it's in a vacation area up in the mountains. So ideally, like who are you targeting, and how do you plan to list that on Airbnb or whatever platforms you choose to list it on?
Yeah. So the target audience, right? Like this is a classic. I don't know how to say the acronym MSTRA.
Oh, military
Short-term rental
short-term rental
account.
academy. Sorry, I was
Right,
like
right. So Mistra, is that how we say it short? Because
Emstra. Yeah, sure.
Mistra. So like, I mean, kind of wrap it back into some of the education, right? So figuring out who your target audience is one of the premises for all of this. And so my target audience for this particular vacation rental is the Boston area folks. I'm looking for really two types of travelers. One are family vacationers, and the other one are business professionals. So that's where I've honed in on. And so in order to do that, I'm in terms of how I'm setting up the place, and because I had to do a reno, which in some cases went down to studs,
Mhm.
I'm able to kind of set that up. So there'll be an outdoor fire pit. There's going to be a outdoor fire pit, indoor fireplace, and a path that leads about 250 feet down to the river, which the river itself is gorgeous. And I got to carve that path out because there's probably a 30-degree slope for about the first, I don't know, maybe the first 100 feet, 175 feet. Right. So that like these things, aiming these things for this target audience are important. So going down the river with the kids, or going on the river because you're a business professional, right? And you just want a place to hang out. Obviously, I'm going to put high-speed internet in there. I'm going to have an office space in there. I think I mentioned internal fireplaces, perhaps a game room. I'm looking at an old school pinball machine and like an old school Pac-Man thing. Pac-Man arcade game, right? And again, I'm trying to bring it this flair to pull people out of Boston, because we're about 2 hours from Boston, on a pretty well-known area. It's called the Kangamangas Highway, but it's known for vacation rentals since I was a little kid, growing up in that area.
Wow. Sounds awesome. That's very exciting. I'm excited to see some completed pictures, and once you get it listed and everything. Be exciting. So switching gears a little bit here,
Yeah.
as a military member, how did you feel like the ADPI community aspect of our platform helped you in your journey so far?
Yeah, I think so. The military aspect is I think something that's been super helpful, and what it is this idea of trust. So I mean, I teach college kids now, and and I often talk about trust as an aspect of leadership, right? And so one of the things that EPI does is that there's a layer of trust that happens when you get on any one of those forums and you talk to anybody that's a member, because they have a shared experience. Now, truth in lending is that not everybody, as we all know as military members, not everybody in the military is forthright and a good person. That's just, I mean, we're in that sense, we're a cross section of our society writ large, but there's this immediate connection, right? And that you build trust from that starting point, and then it starts far better than if you do it just cold calling folks. And so, going back to that STR, one of the hardest things that I've had to manage is the renovation, because I'm like 2,000 miles away,
Mhm.
So that's been a problem. It's been problematic, and I've been burned a little bit. And part of that is, well, there's no network that I have up there. ADPI provides a network, and from that, in several, I'm in two other deals with folks from ADPI. Um, one in Florida and the other one in Pennsylvania. So, like I said, the trust piece is huge. Heck, let me just a great example is so two of us are in a partnership. There's well, several of us in a partnership in Pennsylvania. I happen to be at summer training for cadets this summer. Uh, just so happens that another person in that partnership was down there, and we ran into each other. And that person, because of our relationship that was initiated through the network through ADPI, and that grew through the partnership, he calls me up and he's like, "Hey, sir, can you come promote me?" Which is one of those great things that you get to do as a senior or a more senior leader in the service is promote folks. And when they ask them to you, it's like a humbling experience. Like, you want me? I'm like, nobody. He's like, no, but you, X, Y, and Z. So I think it's the trust that's built on that network, which is super important.
Thank you for that example. That I love hearing that when you run into other people from the ADPI community, it's like, hey, what's up? Meeting new people and being able to finding future partners. It's valuable. So, okay. Next, would you recommend the ADPI platform to other military members, veterans, or their families if they are interested in real estate? And if you could just give a brief explanation of why.
Yeah, I do. So I get to my honest experiences. I started, like I said earlier, I started off with the podcast, and then I shifted over from the podcast to Emria, then immediately into the M Estra, Emstra, and then I ultimately wanted to land in multifamily, in which I took the course, and so I think so. My experience, I didn't have a lot of experience in the ADPI community on Facebook. Was not my medium of choice. It wasn't something I missed that piece of it. And I say missed it. I didn't participate in that piece of it. Um, and my experience at that piece was there's a lot there, but it's also because there's a lot of people there. Um, I think that you have to be more cautious with a group of 60,000 than I do in any one of the course groups. So the course groups themselves have been phenomenal. Do you get bad advice? Occasionally, and I say that in Truth in Lending, but that is super super. Like, you might get somebody that says something's off, but there's somebody else that's always coming in. The value that it's added is exponentially better than anything on the negative side. And so, I don't know, coming back around to like what I recommended, absolutely. But I would really recommend stepping into the door with Emria as sort of your opening thing. And I am not getting paid for any endorsements on this. But I think there's something about, if I'm willing to shell out a little bit of money, that means that I'm investing myself in this education. Um, and I think that there's something to that. But I would recommend Emria, the Short Term Academy, or the Multifamily Academy, and I think those are phenomenal.
Yeah, Emory is a great foundational just to start terminology, dipping your feet in and not feeling too overwhelmed. It is a lot of information, but it's just, yeah, it's a great starting point.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you were just trying to, if you knew, hey, I want to get into this, and you just didn't know where to start, I wouldn't do what I did. I had already I'd been in the game, knowing or not knowing, for a while, and with some goals and objectives, which is why I did all three of those courses. Um, and I had some things pop up, like this deal in New Hampshire popped up, which is why I did STR. I wasn't going to do the Short-Term Rental Academy. I was going to jump right from MRIA to the Multifamily Academy, but because this thing came up and there was some family involved, I said, "Hey, I'm going to do that for family." So that was my path. I would recommend to anybody, if you really interested in investing, and real estate, do MRIA, and it starts the network, and it gives you the tight network versus the large Facebook crowd, uh,
Mhm.
if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and actually we do have ADPI Campus Boot Camp now. So what ADPI Campus Boot Camp now, which we just launched, I think about a month ago, where you can get in, take a couple starter courses. We have a coach, Beth. She's also the manager and circle with ADPI Campus, and she helps you figure out what path to go down after you take those courses. So you actually have like a little bit of mentoring in those beginning courses if you have no idea where to start. So that's kind of why we created ADPI Bootcamp and ADPI campuses for people, who really don't know where to start. So that's also a good starting point too, now that we do have that launched and out there. So anywho, well, last question. Can you tell us a little bit about your future plans in real estate investing, and are you going to be stopping where you're at, or what's your end goal in the upcoming years?
Well, stopping, not a chance. Uh, so, uh, so for I guess so my career path, I'm going to retire for the Army here in the next 12 months ish, and my goal and is to uh, do multifamily in the Kansas City area. So a couple of things that I've learned from my experience and through the course was be local. I'm gonna once I retire, I'll be moving to the Kansas City area.
Great
Uh,
city.
right. And that's what what ADPI has allowed me to do is I already have sort of the rough construct of what that team looks like. Um, and so that's where it's heading in the long term. So that's 12 to 24 months out. In the near term, it's finishing this short-term rental up in New Hampshire. It's working on working within the two partnership deals that I'm currently also invested in. Um, yeah, so I mean, I think that that's the future. I would say the other sort of tie is to stay engaged in the ADPI community, because I think the community, particularly as you become more and more advanced uh, in sort of not just only what you want to do, but how you understand doing those things.
Mm-hmm.
It's still accessible, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
Chris Lockwood or Kevin Brenner, they're accessible people. Um, it's still and that is important. I think that is another thing from the community. It's getting those rock stars, the heroes that ADPI calls them heroes. Um, those people that have been successful in the business that will mentor, and you mentioned the mentor from the boot camp thing, um, mentor those that are up and coming. And I think that really pulls a thread from what we do in the military, or what we should be doing in the military,
Mm-hmm.
is mentoring our subordinates, being mentored, accepting mentorship from our seniors, and growing and developing constantly with no end state in mind, but instead this idea that it's constant growth. So staying engaged in ADPI is something I'm also committed to.
Oh, I love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I also want to throw out there for whoever's again watching this live or later on a recording, if you want to learn more about Chris and his story, ADPI podcast on Apple, episode 300. You can find him. Him and Kevin had a great conversation on there. And otherwise, in the meantime, thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate you coming on and telling your story, and um, I loved listening to it. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. All right. Well, we'll be in touch. Thank you, Chris.